Shah Mahmoud Hanifi. He is a professor of Middle Eastern and South Asian history over at James Madison University. Welcome to the show. All right, without a doubt, now that the airport is open, one of the top priorities, at least from the international community's perspective, is the country averting a humanitarian crisis. I guess because of how much Afghanistan has relied on the United States as well as other Western countries up until now to fund the budget, it really does come down to them, right?
To manage the humanitarian crisis, the international community will certainly have to be involved. And part of the challenge for the Taliban is to muster its own organizational capacity to distribute resources, the limited resources that are available, in a redistributive manner, which is something the Afghan state has never, in whatever version, been successful at redistribution of local resources. So the challenges remain very, very high for both the Taliban and the international community.
Let's talk about that ability, because you said the previous government could not do this effectively. The Taliban basically walked into a power vacuum. I mean, what are your thoughts on whether or not the Taliban can govern effectively? I mean, this is one thing, sort of to give up money, but governance is a completely different ball game. And the Taliban really hasn't demonstrated that it has that skill set.
Well, the Taliban are not a monolithic unit. I think there are competing factions is one word for the diversity of experience and skill sets that the Taliban as a whole represent. In terms of resource management, one of the foundational mechanisms for the traditional Afghan economy is the Hawala system, which is a money transfer system outside of, shall we say, certified international bank standards. And if the international community rendered the Hawala system illegal, it was one of the first legal moves after 9/11. And if the international community loosens up the money transfer system, the Kabul money market, for example, international funds from a local level and a variety of, shall we say, more private donors and individuals can reach affected communities and regions in Afghanistan.
Uh,
So there's a lot of reality here.
Tell me this. I mean, you said the fact that it's not a monolith and that there are various competing factions within this group, which is fairly new to someone who's not familiar with the Taliban and the history of Afghanistan. And I think we saw that with the appointment or the delayed appointment of particular officials in this caretaker government. How is this going to play in on how the group governs the country?
Well, it's a very complex question, but I think the lineage of the Taliban runs through international circuits and networks, but in varying ways. If we just take the, shall we say, traditional leadership base in southern Afghanistan, that maybe core Taliban community has a long experience together in earlier periods of jihad in the 90s, and some of those individuals, of course, were interred in after the 9/11 in Guantanamo. And so Pakistan will continue to exert a large, perhaps even formative influence on policy and activities with that group, it seems to me. There is an Eastern kind of network that forms the Taliban. This involves the Quetta Shura and to some extent the Haqqani network that is also tied, shall we say, to Pakistan, but in sort of different regional ways. And then there's the North, where the Taliban factions in the north, including Al Qaeda, are also impacted by Central Asian Islamist groups from Uzbekistan and the Caucasus. And so each of those, shall we say, factions or networks contains different connections to the international actors that are influencing the Taliban.
You mentioned that Pakistan is going to have a large and formative influence with the group. I'm wondering if you could sort of comment on China.
Well, China was one of the first governments to receive a Taliban emissary after the sort of not conquest, occupation and rule in Kabul. And China has had and continues to have a serious presence in Afghanistan through mineral mining. The Mas Ainat copper mine south of Kabul is a gigantic Chinese investment in Afghanistan. And their Belt and Road Initiative would seem to put Afghanistan in their long term strategic sights. But of course, the Chinese have relationships with Pakistan and Iran that are deep and complex. And in that sense, from a strategic perspective, incorporating Afghanistan into those policy projections would seem to be very much on the horizon.
Shah Mahmoud Hanifi, thank you very much for joining us here on the NewsHour. I do appreciate your analysis. Thank you.